This lecture will focus on the last steps of the Union falling apart before the Civil War would start. In the election of 1860, the Democratic Party started to split apart. The Democrats of the North wanted popular sovereignty. Remember that idea that each new territory and new state should get to decide on their own if they wanted slavery or not. And the people of the South the Democrats of the South wanted to uphold that Dred Scott decision and endorse a federal slave code. So that would be a whole country code that would show how slavery was going to work. So basically saying slavery was legal everywhere. And because of this, nobody could get enough votes to become the candidate for the Democratic Party. And so the Democratic Party split. And they had Stephen Douglas, this guy right here, okay, Stephen Douglas, as the Democrat in the North. His supporters in the South started to create some delegations to get him the nomination, but those original Southern delegations completely walked out when this happened, and so they just wouldn't let him become the Democrat. And so he was the Northern Democrat. He was seen as the Northern Democrat. And the delegations that had walked out selected this other man, John Breckinridge, who wanted the slave code and also wanted popular sovereignty, like both of them. He was nominated by those delegations that had walked out. That was John Breckinridge. And so now the Democratic Party was split into two. So each one of those men is only going to get maybe half of the votes, which really, really hurts their chances of winning. And then another party, a brand new party, had come up. John Bell was part of the Constitutional Union Party. Their whole goal was to just stop the country from splitting up and breaking into two pieces and just follow the Constitution to do that. So completely avoided the issue of slavery and was just trying to keep the country together. And John Bell is this man down in the bottom right corner. And these were three of the four main candidates. We'll move on to the next slide to meet the last candidate that you guys already know a little bit about, Abraham Lincoln. So the Republicans knew that they were not going to be able to win basically any states in the South. And so they knew that they would need to win absolutely the entire North. Every single state in the North would have to vote Republican for them to have a chance. And so really the best candidate at the time was probably William Seward. He had the experience. He was an experienced politician. But he was seen as kind of an extremist, the kind of on really, really hard on the side of the Republicans. And not everybody in the North, maybe some of these northern states, wouldn't believe or be on his side as much as they needed. And so the Republicans really wanted to show we're not an anti-slavery party, we're just a party who doesn't want slavery in the new territories. And so they selected Abraham Lincoln as their as their candidate. And so Abraham Lincoln, famous from his debate with Stephen Douglas, came in as a Republican candidate, and he kind of made the platform very clear. So the Republican platform was these four things, and a platform is just kind of what you stand for, right? It's the ideals that you stand on. It's a platform, right? That's the idea. And so the first one is that southern states get to keep slavery in their borders. We are fine with those states that are already slave states being slave states. They also wanted higher tariffs to be able to protect the industry here in America a little bit more. Third, they wanted a new homestead law, which would encourage and give land to people that wanted to move out to the West and fill up these territories and make them into states. And then the Republicans also were heavily in favor of the Transcontinental Railroad, again, to finish out the United States, to fill it up with people and create these new states. And because the Democratic votes were split, Lincoln did win the election because he won all of those northern states, because some of them would vote for each of the other candidates, some of the Democrats, but all of the Republicans voted for Lincoln. Okay. And so when Lincoln became the president, the South felt that their society and their culture and everything they had were threatened, and that they were left with no choice but to secede from the Union. So we're going to start seeing the states that have been threatening it for a very long time actually start to secede from the Union. If we look here at the map, you can see in red that Lincoln won all of the North, and Bell won some of those middle states that just didn't want to break up. That's the pink there. Douglas was only able to win his home state of Illinois and then part of New Jersey. And then Breckinridge won basically the entire South. So that's how Lincoln was elected. So the very first state to secede was, of course, the one that had been threatening to secede since Andrew Jackson's times. That would be South Carolina. Okay, on February 1st, 1861, they seceded, and soon thereafter, 6 more states in the lower South seceded. So you'll see all of the green states on this map were the very first ones to secede: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, and then, of course, South Carolina. The southern people in these states started to try and capture and take over a lot of the federal property, so anything that was owned by the federal government, including arsenals where weapons were held, and forts which were set up for defense. They weren't able to get all of the forts, a couple of them in Florida, and then a really important one in South Carolina called Fort Sumter out in Charleston, South Carolina Harbor. And so while this is happening and they're taking it over and everything like that, Congress is trying to come up with a compromise. So a couple of constitutional amendments were proposed to try to help out and get the South back, proposed to guarantee slavery where it existed and bring the Missouri Compromise line back. Okay, this was voted down by the Republicans in Congress. They wanted no more slavery out into the new territories, and so they said, no, we're not going to do it. And at Lincoln's urging, they voted it down. Then Virginia got together, and they, of course, Virginia, right here, okay, not wanting to have a fight where they're going to be the land where all of the fighting happens, they held a peace conference to try and stop it, because they were kind of with the South and they had the same ideas as them, but they didn't want the fight to happen. And so they held a peace conference, but the secessionist states, the green states, didn't even show up. Okay, and the plan was voted down soon by Congress because it just wasn't going to work out, because the people who were most angry were not there to talk about it at that time. Take a moment to write out the answer to checkpoint question number 1. So in February of 1861, the new states of the Confederate nation got together and created this new country. This new country they called the Confederate States of America. Okay, and they met in Montgomery, Alabama, and they created a constitution. And the constitution was a lot like the United States Constitution, but had a few different extra pieces that would fit a little better with how the South felt. Okay, first off, each state would be independent, so they would be able to make their decisions for themselves, and they would have complete control over what happened in their state. The second thing was it guaranteed slavery in all of the territory. Anywhere that happened within Confederate States of America and their territories would all be slavery legal. Slavery would be legal there. Okay. The third is they banned protective tariffs. They didn't want any tariffs. They wanted to be able to trade their goods that they were creating in the South, their agricultural goods, with other countries without any penalties, and get goods from other countries without any penalties. They also banned the importation of slaves. They didn't want any more new slaves being captured in Africa and brought over, because that they saw as an evil thing, a bad thing. And they limited the presidency within their country to a 6-year term. They also chose this man, Jefferson Davis, as their president. Remember the man who fought for the Gadsden Purchase? He was a former senator from Mississippi, and so this new country was created and created under this flag. This is the Confederate flag. I know it's not the Confederate flag that you think about and that you see nowadays. That is so controversial. That with the blue bars going across the red background and the stars there. This is the actual official Confederate flag, and that one was the battle flag of the Confederates. So, just kind of something to think about and to look at, and really have that understanding of history and what these flags meant. So Lincoln, of course, had to respond as the president when a lot of his land and the country is kind of falling apart around him. And so on his inaugural address on March 4th of 1861, as he became the president, he directly spoke to the seceding states in his uh, in his speech, and he said, "I will not interfere with slavery, like I've always said from the beginning. I'm not going to take it away from you, but the union of the states is perpetual." He didn't threaten them or anything, but he said that he intended to hold, occupy, and possess the federal property in their states. Okay, and when he said that, it was kind of a threat, saying, "We're going to hold on to this property, and we'll fight you over it if we have to. Okay, this is ours." And so not only that, but he also encouraged them to come back together, saying that we're not enemies, we're friends. We can't be enemies, even though we're angry at each other. It can't break what we mean to each other. We are a country all together. And so tried to get them to come back with that. At around the same time, Fort Sumter, remember, is one of those places in Charleston Harbor that had not been taken yet by the South Carolina people, right? And so Lincoln announced that he would send a ship to resupply the fort because the people were running out of food and stuff as they were cut off from the rest of the country. And so the South had to make a decision. If they shot at the ship that was coming to resupply them, they'd be shooting at a Union ship, and they would be the reason that the war started. They would cause the war. Okay, and so they decided the best thing to do would be to take the fort before the ship showed up, and just take it over, and then they would just be dealing with that problem and not necessarily. A fight with directly with the United States military. And so they decided to take the fort before the ship come, and they sent a letter to the commander of the fort demanding that he surrender and give it up. Otherwise, they would attack. The commander of the fort, under his orders, did not surrender it. And so the people of the South bombarded the fort with cannonballs and fire for about 33 hours until they surrendered, until they gave up. And the South took control of Fort Sumter. And this is the action, this is the actual attack that would mark the beginning of the Civil War. War hadn't been declared yet, but this is the first major act of aggression that would lead to the Civil War needing to take place. So Abraham Lincoln, seeing that a war was going to happen, called for 75,000 volunteers to join the military for 90 days. And because this war is going to happen, right? They're joining the military for 90 days. He thought that that would be all it would take. He'd just, kind of slap them on the wrist and get the South back in, and it would be over. Most of the people in the Upper South didn't want to secede. They were trying to stop it from happening, but they saw a war coming, and so they started to secede because they still agreed with the people in the South. And so Virginia was the first one right here. Okay, they were the first one to secede in April of 1861, and in response to that, the capital of the Confederacy was moved from Alabama up to Richmond, Virginia. And then by June of 1861, so just a few short months later, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina had all joined the Confederate States of America and had seceded from the United States. the Union was they really needed to hold on to a few states, to some border states. And so Maryland was a really important one because Maryland is right here. In between Maryland and Virginia, right in the middle, is the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C. Okay, so they already right across the river had Virginia that was going to be a Confederate state, right? And if Maryland left, which was the slave state, and became part of the Confederacy, then they would be surrounded completely. The capital of the United States would be surrounded by the Confederacy. So Lincoln couldn't allow that to happen. So he imposed something called martial law, where he, in Baltimore, which was dealing with riots and trying to secede and all that kind of stuff. And so the law was enforced by military forces. They came in, they put a strict curfew, so you had to be in your house by a certain amount of time, and they suspended some of the civil rights where anything could happen to you if you didn't follow these very, very strict laws. And that was able to be successful and keep Maryland as part of the Union because of that. Kentucky was another one. Kentucky right here, okay, they were neutral. They were completely neutral, and Lincoln just decided to wait them out and see what happened, and try and convince them with words instead of fighting against them. Didn't want to send in the martial law, and then the Confederacy decided that they needed to come in and take action, and they invaded Kentucky and were trying to take them over by force and have them become part of them. And that made Kentucky angry, and they decided to fight against the South. Okay, and so they decided to join the Union as well. Missouri voted completely against secession, and a struggle broke out between anti-secession and pro-secession people, and the federal government decided to send troops to help out the people that were on the Union side win this struggle, and they won, and Missouri joined the Union as well. So now we've kind of got our two sides. We've got the North, which is all of this part broken off. Okay, all of these states are all part of that, and then the South, the Confederate States of America down here. Okay, and with all of this fighting, all of this figuring who's going to be on what side, now we're set up, and the Civil War and the military part of this is really going to start to happen. Write out 3 questions you have from the notes so far. If you don't have any questions, create 3 test questions you might see on a quiz or a test.